All right, so I'm Arthur Lunn. I'm from Giveth. I don't know if anybody knows Giveth, but Giveth is basically involved in charity, on-chain charity. So we're trying to decentralize the future of giving. At Giveth, I work under the Social Coding Circle. And the general idea of the Social Coding Circle is to experiment with different governance processes, since basically any charity organization is going to need governance, and do that on open source projects. So get people excited about open source stuff and get them to start working on things that they care about and things that they see in the ecosystem that they want to contribute to in a permissionless way while still getting rewarded. So that's sort of what I've been working on. For this presentation, I'm going to go over a little bit an application that I'm developing under a grant from Aragon, the Aragon network. That's goal is to sort of move that process along. We've seen some incentivization of issues and general open source contributions under bounties, but the goal of this application is to sort of bring that forward and start at the smallest level possible integrating participation in the whole bounty process. So in this presentation, I'm basically going to go over the question that I'm asking in developing these tools for open source projects, how I think that should happen, or what my goal is in developing these tools, the approach that we're taking. I'm going to sort of show what we have so far. It's in very early stages, so we've been working on this for maybe 3 weeks. But part of the reason that I'm presenting this is because there's a chance for everybody here to get involved. We're trying to dog food this whole process. So tomorrow you can start contributing to these things, and within a week you can be in our meetings and building this with us. So that's why I'm presenting this as early as possible. I'll just show you some of the ideas, but again, we're in the very early stages with that. So the question, how do we leverage these new organizational structures that we have in a way that allows communities to develop and maintain open source software in a way that is fair to all contributors, has no barriers to entry, is financially practical, which is a difficult one, and is efficient? So the idea that I'm trying to bring forward, or a lot of people are trying to bring forward, but this project also aligns itself with, is that you have self-governed software and then you can have permissionless progress. The idea is to, if you completely DAOify a repository or a code base, then you can have these sort of agile pods that themselves are separate DAOs that can contribute to whatever they really want to at any given time. So you can have people dropping in and out of these projects, maintaining comparable to salary without getting locked into a specific company or belonging to a company or organization. So that's the goal, I guess. So when you're realizing this goal, you need to understand that to get these projects off the ground, you need some sort of funding. One of the challenges historically before this whole blockchain thing happened was, how do you fund open source software? And that's not something that I feel we've entirely answered. We've just sort of put a Band-Aid on it with this whole ICO craze. So there's a lot of money pouring into these projects that are open source that don't necessarily have sustainable or defensible profit models. So long term, where are we going with this? Like, what do we see as the way that open source projects are going to be able to funnel funds into them to sustain themselves over time? So if you look at other software profit models right now, you have ad-based, which obviously doesn't really work on blockchain. Everybody should own their own data, so ads should kind of just go away. Obviously, there's some groups that are working on ad projects, but it's not going to be the core profit model for software going forward. You also really can't do software as a service because, again, you need to own the software to do that in a solid way. Obviously, there are some groups that do open source subscription and maintenance models, but we don't really see that in the blockchain space yet. So that might be something that starts to develop, and obviously some of the most successful open source profit models in the past have relied on support and maintenance as their cornerstones. But that doesn't answer the question of how you initially fund these projects and how you get them jump-started. And I don't entirely know the answer to that, but hopefully we'll figure that out. So the approach is basically to have strong alignment among the pods and then high levels of autonomy. This is sort of the balance when you're thinking about the pods that are going to be contributing to the open source projects. of the top-down versus bottom-up. We basically already have relatively decentralized development in the software world. So on the base level of the planning and the execution of software development, we don't really need to do anything different. The main thing that we need to change is how the expectations come down from wherever the money is coming from, and how the people that are coming to these projects can basically negotiate compensation without belonging to the company. So that's sort of the problem that we're solving. We already have the answers to the organizational elements. We need to start combining the organizational elements with the compensation elements. So basically that's where DAOs come in, obviously. But I don't believe that you should just have one. I think that we need to start with the smallest ones we can and then sort of build up. So if we have every sort of development unit become its own organization and then belong to these sort of larger groups, that's sort of the approach that I think we should start taking. A lot of the projects that have tried to create these big organizations, decentralized autonomous organizations, have done so at scale from day one. And we need more failure before we really even know where we're going with that. We need to have groups of maybe, again, 3 to 8 organize, and then organize into larger cells. That way, when one idea fails, you just go on to the next one. There's very little loss in that. But we haven't seen enough failure yet. There's all these huge projects that have these big ideas and enough runway to the point where they're not giving us information because we don't know if they work yet. And we're not going to know if they work yet because they have 2-3 years before they're financially bankrupt. So we need something quicker. We need something like now. So I think that basically in order to have these sort of small pods, we're going to need to support some sort of DAO engine. Obviously, I think Aragon is the answer there, but what is a DAO engine? So basically, it's anything that can give you governance, accounting, and questionably upgradability. There's sort of a question as to whether or not upgradability is a cornerstone of this idea, but basically what it all comes down to is whether or not you rely on forking to upgrade your code. Personally, I think that it's very important to have some sort of upgrade mechanism baked in to whatever engine you're using, because even though you want to start very small, the end goal should obviously be to get these organizations of organizations as big as you can. And if you're relying on a fork mechanism to upgrade your code, you're automatically creating a point where you can fracture your community. And since the idea is to grow and maintain as large a community as possible, you don't want to do that. So again, the other major examples of these that we have right now are DAO Stack and Colony. Colony doesn't really say the word DAO, but basically what they're building these open communities, which is the same thing. It has these same basic principles. There's other projects too, but those are the main ones that we're looking at right now. And personally, I think that Aragon's furthest along since you can build stuff on it. You can build stuff on it now. So again, what is Aragon? They don't really like it when I call them a DAO engine. But they basically, again, it gives you the governance and upgradability. Those are obviously important outside of just decentralized organizations. They handle a lot of the upgradability through an access control layer. And the way to do that in a decentralized way is to assign these access control roles to contracts. But you can just as easily assign these to people and then just handle a regular business with regular roles, have a board, assign these roles to whoever you want, and they can upgrade the code and get all the fun sort of features that you get for free without having to create some sort of complex governance mechanism, which is kind of the easy way out, but it definitely works now a lot better. And again, the tools that they have right now, you can start building applications with right now. And I think that people should start playing with this stuff, because if we can organize within larger networks, we're just going to get more interesting effects, right? Oh, all right, we're back. Lost my place. So I'm just going to go briefly over the architecture of what they have. The main things that you're going to want to look for in their stack when you're first starting are the OS. That's basically all the contracts and stuff. There's like 3 main pieces that you need to worry about. There's the access control layer, which is just lets you assign roles and then parameterized roles. It functions very similar to how like an ownable contract would, only you can do a lot more since you have roles instead of just that one owner role. There's also there's a script forwarding mechanism, which is a very common thing that you'll see in these DAO engines. Basically, if you want to have any level of upgradability, you need to have a way to execute arbitrary scripts, which is where a lot of the criticism of upgradability comes in. That's not something that's, it's something that's relatively dangerous from a security standpoint to be doing in smart contracts. So again, that's why they get a lot of flack for promoting this idea of upgradability. There's really no security vulnerability in the idea of forking code. And then, sorry, excuse me. In addition to that, they have basic governance tools. So you have like a very basic voting, yeah. Hopefully we'll get more interesting ones after that, because just basic yes/no voting isn't very interesting. Then you also get some other like nice things. I'm not going to go into these very much, just because it's not as interesting, and you don't necessarily need to use these to be part of like the network. The only thing that matters for the network is basically that you belong to the same kernel. The kernel is the thing that provides all the base layer functionality of the quote-unquote DAO engine. Most systems have something like this. And then the Aragon JS server and the client, that just abstracts out your Web3 actions for security and ease. And then you get a bunch of like free React stuff for the UI. But again, that's not as interesting. So where does Giveth come in all this? Basically, the idea is that we think of Aragon as being more tech first, which again is not something they particularly like. They want to be about the people too. But we think about where people first, they're tech first. So it makes sense to bring these two things together, because we've been working like on the ground, going forward and finding communities, finding people that want to be involved in these things, specifically in the space of charity, and just playing, just trying stuff. We've been using something that we call a reward DAO for a little over a year now. And the idea is basically that people show up, they just start doing stuff in a permissionless way, they get points, and then at the end of the month, those points get some value. So you get to give people recognition without attaching a specific dollar amount to that recognition. So there's just these little things like this that we've been playing with, and we've been going around and trying to basically just recruit as many people as possible. And since we are completely donation-based, the people that we end up getting are people that want to play with this stuff, want to just drive forward, you know, charity, and have fun. So we don't have to worry about too many people being sort of like profit hungry, which is sort of nice. So we bring the people side, and then Aragon brings the tech side. Obviously, they're a lot farther along than we are when it comes to a lot of these base level contracts and things that I think that basically everybody's going to need if they want to do any sort of decentralized community. Again, we do what we call DACs, and they do what they call DAOs. And more we're starting to have to define what the difference between these things are. So I think what it really comes down to is the idea of a community is a group of people that are coordinated around a set of core values, and an organization is a group of people that are organized around a set of core goals. So if you look at that understanding of a DAC, a decentralized altruistic community, and a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, you sort of can see this map where at the highest levels, things start to become DACs, because they don't have the necessary organization and coordination and alignment to start directing action in a clear way. But as you get further down and they organize into smaller pods, that's when you start to get actual organizations that can do stuff. So that's where I think the difference lies, but again, we don't really know. We're just playing with words. So this is what we're actually building under the grant, and this is what we think will sort of help take projects from repositories and turn them into communities, or at least it's one of many things that will help. So we're expanding some of the basic voting patterns that they have. We're doing range voting, which will let you, instead of doing a yay-nay vote, you can assign, there'll be a set of options. Well, actually, we already have this implemented, so but the way it works is there's a set of options, and you can distribute your full token weight of whatever voting token you're using among those options. So it lets you actually have some output from your voting application, which within their system, you then forward into whatever you want to be next in the chain. The idea is that as much as possible, we want to create applications that we can chain into each other so that the first application in the chain has no idea what's going to be called next, right? So that's, I guess, one of the interesting things about range voting is the first thing within their system that actually has any sort of output into the next function call. And then we are also doing just basic GitHub integration. This doesn't have anything to do with blockchain or anything, but if we're going to be working on these projects, you need to have a way to view your repositories and your issues within the Aragon application. We're also doing basic task planning toolkits. So the idea is to be able to do interactions with standard bounties. We're going through status as open bounties system again. And then just issue curation. The issue curation is basically the ability to do sort of the basic things that you see in like a Scrum flow on-chain. So once you can do those things, you get to manipulate your compensation models based on this on-chain data. We're not super opinionated about how people should be doing that, but we think it's a useful tool to have when you're building these applications. Then there's a series of financial planning elements. Fixed payout is basically just their basic accounting application. It gives somebody a regular payout. Dynamic payout is something that you can vote on to manipulate. So if this is like it's like a performance-based bonus is the idea of it. So if you have your open source contributors and you're guaranteeing them $3,000 a month, but you're saying, you know, if we get a lot of open source contributions, we can vote and make that maybe an extra $1,000 to $2,000 a month. So you can sort of slide the amount of money that you're paying out to your open source contributions. That way there's a guaranteed amount that these people can rely on every month, but if they really, you know, step up, they're going to get a little bit extra. We think this works better than just flat bounties, because the issue with flat bounties is that you don't necessarily know if you're going to be able to sustain yourself with them. But if there's these sort of promises or these reward DAOs that are constantly pumping a certain amount of money into open source contribution, that's where you can start to get people who basically make up their full salary on these reliable pay sources. And then the payout engine is basically just, it's like a budgeting tool. It lets you take the range vote output and then set up an automated budget. So like you can do this on either a monthly basis or a one-time basis or whatever you want. But all it'll do is it'll take a vote from the organization, and then any funds that come into that contract, based on the distribution that they vote on, it feeds them back out on the other side. So this is kind of what that looks like. So this would be like 0 to 1,000 that goes into the dynamic payout, and then you have a fixed payout. Let's say this is 3,000. The way that we modeled this is we modeled this right off of what we do for our reward DAO and Giveth. So right now we give 3,000 to 4,000 to just whatever people do. It's sort of like a loose form permissionless reward DAO. The reward DAO that we're doing within the planning application is a lot more structured. But this has been fun, and it's given us a lot of information about how you can sort of reward people that just show up and start doing stuff. So let's say that we have this dynamic payout, people vote, and they decide to give 1,000 extra into this payout engine. So then what you do is you have people voting on 4 different categories. These aren't necessarily the right values here, but the end result should be that you get a distribution fed into this. So you could have like a 20-30, 20-30 or something like that. So then from that, you know that 20% of whatever goes into this should go here. 30% of whatever goes into this from these should go here, and et cetera. So then once you have this information paid out into these reward engines, basically what you can, the reward engine is aimed to do is basically like dividend payout, but in constant time. One of the issues with dividend payouts that we've seen implemented is that you have to have some sort of iteration, and you can't really get away with that sort of iteration if you have a lot of token holders that you're paying out to. So it can do things other than dividends, but the base idea of it is that it does that. So ideally, what we want to do with the reward engine is to create an in-between from where the people are getting some sort of reward for clearing bounties and issues and where they're getting paid out, so that whatever token they get from the bounties, they maintain as a non-transferable governance token, and then they can use that non-transferable governance token on a specific era. That way, the governance token that they hold shows that they deserve some sort of payout, so they can actually participate and play in the repository that they're in. Of what the issues are going to look like once we import into this. Again, we're using pre-existing bounty systems to do this. Reinvent the wheel, especially when there's a standardized bounty program now. So this, again, there should be more than 2 options here. There should be like 4 options. And the idea is that you distribute whatever token weight you have for that vote across those options. Here's the start of the payout engine. So this payout engine actually triggers both a payout engine and a range vote. So they're 2 different elements. And then yeah, so we're trying this. Like we're trying to use these tools now. The idea is that we assign issue weights, and then we just distribute out whatever people clear based on the percentage of issues that they cleared from open source contributions. It's a little bit more clear in this document, so I recommend you go there. But another element that we're adding to that is that once you clear a certain number of like issue points, just start coming to our meetings. Start voting on these things, start playing with this stuff. We don't have any of this on chain, but that doesn't mean that we can't start using these systems. I think it's very important for people to start using these systems as quick as possible. If it's not secure to put the funds on chain, we need to just do practice. We need to try it in whatever way we can. And that goes with any system that anybody thinks will work for any of this stuff. I really I cannot emphasize enough the fact that I have no idea if any of this is going to work. I think it might, but like I'm not the only person that's doing something similar to this, but hopefully we're going to get some results quick. And that's really the goal here, is to get something quick and dirty, up and running, fast. So yeah, I guess what's the takeaway? Everybody should do this. Any project that wants some sort of open source contribution or wants to start getting people to participate in their repositories should have some sort of mechanism like this. It's not enough to just have bounties. You need to have a way for people to have a voice in the development quick. And they need to be able to see in your contributing document how they're going to get to that, ideally. Otherwise, you have a lot of these one-offs where people are wasting effort getting involved in your project, clearing one issue or one bounty or something, and then just not feeling involved and sort of drifting off. So in order to retain those people, those open source contributors, especially across project, we need to make sure that they have the proper compensation and they have the voice. So yeah, that's basically what I've got. I left a fair amount for questions because I have a feeling that I didn't really explain the actual application very well, and there's going to be a lot of questions. But yeah, if you do want to get involved, please come find me somewhere. If you go here, that'll give you links to our Riot and stuff. Also within the Giveth organization, if you go into the planning app repository, that has a ton of contact information for the full team. Yeah, so questions? No questions. I couldn't have explained it that well. Come on.
Maybe after.
Yeah. All right, yeah. I don't know, I've got 10 minutes. Yeah, I guess find me if you've got questions or you want to contribute.